The Walt Disney Company is broken. And more aptly put, it's broken at the hands of its own CEO, Bob Iger. Once and again CEO Bob Iger. We got a brief stint of Bob Chapek there in the middle. And as I predicted, Bob Chapek would be saddled with the blame for all of Disney's woes, at least in the beginning. But since then, especially in the last few weeks, it seems the tables have turned, with major media outlets really zeroing in on Iger, calling him out for previous failures and mistakes such as spending $70+ billion to acquire Fox back in 2019, an investment that seems to have gone practically nowhere by comparison to the price paid for such an asset. And it seems everything at the theater that hits from the Walt Disney Company, that goes nowhere too. Disney Plus? Yeah, same thing. In fact, the most popular stuff consistently on Disney Plus each and every week that hits the Nielsen charts is Bluey, which is a property that the Walt Disney Company neither created nor owns. That's something that they lease. And that doesn't even begin to dive into the woes of the theme parks for the Walt Disney Company, which has been their bread and butter for decades. Everything we're about to discuss is but a precursor for what we will dive into much more deeply this afternoon, Sunday, July 30th at 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Valiant Renegade on the Renegade Online live show. Because that earnings call on Wednesday, August 9th, that we will also be covering live, is going to be something for the Walt Disney Company. And it's probably not going to be something good. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. It's another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. Strangely enough, in the last few weeks, it all started with this. Back on July 12th with the announcement that Bob Iger would be extended as Disney CEO through the end of 2026, the calendar year 26, not Disney's fiscal year, which ends on September 30th of that year. That gives Bob Iger a fresh 2-year start after 2024, beyond where he was already contracted after replacing Bob Chapek back in November of 2022. Now, I'm sure at the time, the Walt Disney board was very proud of themselves, thinking this was the best thing since sliced bread. Well, since then, the last 2 or 3 weeks have proven anything but. Because the very next day, Bob Iger appeared on Squawk Box with CNBC, talking a variety of topics, including the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes that had recently kicked up. And Disney CEO Bob Iger says that writers and actors are not being realistic with strikes. It's very disturbing to me. What else was disturbing was the amount of absolute vitriol and hatred that got thrown back on Disney CEO Bob Iger following these comments on CNBC from SAG-AFTRA and the WGA alike. Bob Iger suddenly has become enemy number one in Hollywood, according to at least the actors and writers that make that town work. Now, to remind folks, it wasn't but a couple of years earlier, back in 2021, where Bob Iger was compared to Bob Chapek when it came down to the whole Scarlett Johansson lawsuit that stemmed from the release of Black Widow, which was dropped in theaters and concurrently on Disney Plus for premium access, where they charge folks about $30 a head to watch that on Disney Plus the same day it dropped in theaters. That lawsuit gave Hollywood trades all the ammunition they needed to go after Bob Chapek, something they'd been wanting to do for quite some time. Bob Chapek at that moment was said to be a dummy, a guy that didn't understand Hollywood, somebody that couldn't work with the Hollywood elite, the actors and the writers, other directors and producers out there. Well, now, funny enough, the Hollywood trades are throwing Bob Iger under the bus for even worse crimes than what they accused Bob Chapek of. And then, of course, the financial trades jumped into the fray with such titles from Bloomberg like Bob Iger shifts from building an empire to a Disney yard sale. That was also in reference to comments that Bob Iger made during the same CNBC interview the day after he was renewed. And Bob Iger was putting things on the table like ABC, for example, linear broadcast, both cable and over-the-air, FX, for example. Certainly he wants to keep the quote-unquote core content in Disney, and things that he obviously considers core are big IPs like Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel, and of course, live sports broadcasting. But what then does he expect to get for something like ABC, which is a declining or deteriorating asset on the market, facing secular headwinds with things like people not wanting to watch broadcast television anymore in lieu of streaming? So maybe Bob Iger just wants to get what he can for it now, because in 5 years, things like ABC might be worth squat. Then again, what is Bob Iger actually going to get for ABC if he removes live sports and Disney's core content from it before he sells it? And of course, there's the Wall Street Journal, who in recent weeks has shown no mercy to CEO Bob Iger and the Walt Disney Company, saying that wokeness has hobbled Disney as it faces the streaming challenge. And then even more recently from The Hollywood Reporter, unpacking Bob Iger's terrible, horrible, no good PR week. There seems little doubt at this point that there is a convergence of both the financial trades and the Hollywood trades that are targeting the Walt Disney Company. And shockingly, Bob Iger himself. This is something that would have been 2 years ago thought to be unheard of, considering all of the positive praise that everybody gave to Bob Iger. He was so wonderful as a Disney CEO. He led Disney into a new renaissance. He led Disney into a new renaissance both in Hollywood and for Wall Street. The streaming issues and everything else that came after that, well, that was all Bob Chapek's fault. Now, if you've been listening here on Valiant Renegade for the past couple of years, you know that we have taken things in the opposite direction, taking a bit more of a pragmatic approach, as we often try to do, to try to bring some sense of reality to what happens in the business and financial realm of Hollywood, because that's what drives everything that they do at the end of the day. Sure, we can talk about all the social and political messaging that Hollywood drives into things, but they're still in the money-making business at day's end, and they still have to move in that direction. We're seeing shifts across the board at Hollywood, moving streaming from premium pay-only services to now advertising-focused services, even still with the premium that you have to pay month over month. And I talked about this recently on another show, to where everything is going to come back to where it was originally. Broadcast television was always based around advertising, because advertising is what drove how successful a given show or project was on that service. Cable then came along. Pay your money, you won't have any commercials. Of course, that was 40 years ago now. And since then, cable has been rife with advertisement, even with your premium fee that you're paying each and every month to watch it. Folks, streaming is going to be no different. This is something that folks like Script Doctor and I have talked about before and are in total agreement with. Everything will have to reset to zero, and that means advertisers will have to come in and drive things. And that's the big problem right now. As streaming shifts more into that advertising component, advertisers are going to make the decisions on what works and what doesn't, and studios are going to have to react accordingly. And as if the icing on the cake was suffering for the Walt Disney Company, the cake itself, or the butter that butters their bread, or the bread and butter for the Walt Disney Company for that end, the theme parks are suffering in terms of revenue. Park attendance has been down, and it doesn't look like there's any sign of it picking up. Now, perhaps later in the year, they might see a bit of a bounce, but will those figures look anything like they have in the past, say in 2021 and 2022? Analysts and Disney itself seems very doubtful going forward that that will be the case. Now, to be fair, Universal Studios also suffered some summer doldrums over the last couple of months, but from everything that we have seen, both anecdotally and factually, it seems that the parks for Universal have suffered less so, in some cases maybe substantially less so than Disney, and in some cases even, the Universal theme parks have absolutely thrived over this past summer. We covered the Universal COMCAST earnings call this past Wednesday on July 27th, and Brian Roberts and company over there at Comcast were very thrilled with the overall performance of theme parks. Much of that explosive growth came from parks overseas, particularly the ones that now have the Epic Universe or Super Mario Bros. World, Nintendo World in them. Nintendo World and Epic Universe in California have done really well, and they're anxiously anticipating the opening of Epic Universe in Orlando at that Universal Park. Meanwhile, the Walt Disney Company seems to have nothing on the horizon that's getting anyone excited. And if you've watched us long enough, you know that we have been covering the entire feud between the state of Florida and the Walt Disney Company since day one. And Disney got another kick in the butt earlier this week, just a day or two ago, when a Florida state judge ruled against the Walt Disney Company's motion to dismiss the case that was filed by the newly formed Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. This is the district and the board that replaced the former Reedy Creek Improvement District that was nothing more than a puppet government of the Walt Disney Company. Disney was taking a last-ditch effort here to have the case thrown out so that they could advance their federal case against the state of Florida for quote-unquote violations of the First Amendment, to which we have been able to find zero merit up to this point, as we keep reminding folks that the Reedy Creek Improvement District was something that was formed by the Florida State Legislature and could therefore be dissolved rightfully by the Florida State Legislature, which they did. And more importantly, the Reedy Creek Improvement District is not a party to the Walt Disney Company. It is a privilege that the Walt Disney Company was handed. However, the Reedy Creek Improvement District, like all the other 1,800 special taxing districts in the state of Florida, is basically an entity of the Florida government. So trying to suggest that legal actions taken by the Florida legislature against a government body that they have the power to both create and destroy somehow violates the First Amendment free speech rights of a completely separate, publicly traded private company, well, guess what? That doesn't fly. Now, that doesn't mean the legal battles are over. They're still going to rage on for probably at least another year, I would suspect at this point, and we will continue to cover it as the news breaks. But nothing is going right for Disney right now, and nothing seems to be improving between now and the next 9 or 10 days before the earnings call. I don't think there's going to be any pleasant surprises. I wish Disney could find something positive to talk about. Even the new release this weekend for the Haunted Mansion? Yeah. With a $150-some-odd million reported production budget, one of the cheaper ones for the Walt Disney Company, the Haunted Mansion only raked in about $24 million in its opening domestically this past weekend, and internationally is being reported at a paltry $9 million for a total haul of about $33 million. Even if that international box office gets adjusted up by double, it's still a terrible opening weekend for a film of this scale. I don't know how well it's going to leg out. I was somewhat hopeful for this, considering the previews and the trailers that I saw. It actually visually looked very entertaining, but it doesn't seem like anybody cares. And this is a problem for the Walt Disney Company when all of their theatrical releases seem to be suffering the same fate. Let's add insult to injury. Barbie has absolutely decimated The Little Mermaid, and Oppenheimer is absolutely decimating Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Both of these movies have racked up more money globally in the first 10 days than The Little Mermaid and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny have racked up in their entire runs to this point. That's roughly a month for Indiana Jones and 2 months for The Little Mermaid. Stay tuned, folks. We're going to dig into this more this afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern on the Sunday Live show on July 30th, right here on Valiant Renegade. Make sure you set those notifications. Of course, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like and subscribe button. We will stay on top of this because Disney's year is about to get even worse. Take care.